fishing for people. I look at the last story and this one, rejected in Nazareth and fishing for people. It's almost a tale of two synagogues. Both synagogues, Jesus went there. And with the first one in Nazareth, they wanted to see a miracle. But instead, Jesus gave them a fulfillment of Old Testament Scripture, which is far better. In Capernaum, before anything could happen there, all of a sudden a demon-possessed man spoke up and Jesus worked a miracle. So in one you have a fulfillment of Scripture, and the other one you have a miracle, and yet in both communities they rejected Christ. In Nazareth, they grabbed him right away and wanted to take him out and stone him. In Capernaum, it was years later that Jesus said that as a community, they had rejected him and he put a curse on their city. And yet, both of these communities, even though they both rejected Christ, they both produced Christian leaders for the early church. In Nazareth, that's where James, the brother of Jesus, came from, and Jude, also a brother of Jesus. Both of them wrote New Testament books. And James was the pastor of the early church in Jerusalem. Of course, Capernaum produced Peter and John and James and Andrew. All of them were leaders in the early church. Now, as you think about Jesus going to Capernaum, you have to remember that in Nazareth, he had been known as a carpenter. More than likely, even though it's not recorded in Scripture, he was known as a carpenter in Capernaum as well. It was a tradition that rabbis were self-supporting. Jesus was a construction worker, worked with stone and wood and oversaw construction sites. More than likely, he did that in Capernaum as well. It's what rabbis did. Jesus probably did that. Peter also continued fishing. Paul was a tent maker. Rabbis were self-supporting. It opened up many doors. It put him with people. It got him into homes, and it was a way of influencing the people. Also, kind of followed up with the policy that Paul talked about: if you don't work, you don't eat. But the point that I'm trying to make right here is that when we think of Jesus, we often see pictures of him where he's kind of anemic looking and frail. Well, that's probably, he didn't look like that at all. He was a construction worker. He was probably muscular, and working outside, he was probably tan. So when you see a construction worker sometime, take a good look. He might have been a lot like what Jesus looked. When he was in Capernaum, he says he went to the house of Peter and Andrew. He was more than likely a guest of Andrew, not of Peter. Peter was the head of the house. More than likely, his father-in-law was dead, and so Peter was the head of the house. And it's true that Jesus and Peter had met each other. Jesus changed his name from Simon to Peter. He's now in his home. But at this point, Peter is not yet a disciple. He's a hard case. He was not easy. He was a working man. He didn't have much time. I think he was happy for Andrew and all, but Andrew was a disciple, but not Peter. As you visit Capernaum, you visit the synagogue and where it was, and as you walk out of the synagogue, the house of Peter is just a little ways away. At this point, they have built a church up on stilts over the top of the house. And you go inside, you can actually look down into Peter's house. What you're actually looking at there was a room that tradition holds. This is the room where Jesus stayed. There's certain markings and certain things that would indicate that was the room where Jesus stayed. Said that he got up before dawn and went out to a place to pray. Of course, we don't know where that's at. But when I go to Israel, I take people to a shallow cave that's up on the side of the hill. It's actually called the Eye of God because it's in the shape of an eye. And we don't know if that's the place where Jesus went, but it's just a little ways from Capernaum. I mean, just a little up the road, up on the side of the hill. Down below was where the fishing took place. The Sea of Galilee is right in the front as you're facing the east. Those of us who visit that place, we say, we don't really know that that's the actual spot. But we all say, well, if it was me, that's where I would go. It's a convenient location. You could pray right there. And especially as you're right there when the sunrise happens, because you're looking at the Sea of Galilee, looking to the east, looking at the sunrise. Well, just below that is the little cove where 7 springs empty into that cove, providing minerals and just a buffet of food for the fish. It's the best fishing in the entire lake. And to this day, that's the spot where Peter and Andrew and James and John were partners in a fishing venture there. And that's where Jesus calls them. Now, it's interesting that Jesus said to Peter, push out a little ways so that I can teach the people. Now, why would he do that? You may think, well, that'd be a better spot. Well, actually, it's not. Why would he go out there? There's other ways that he could do that. Remember what I said. Peter was kind of a hard case. He asked Peter to push out a little ways, and Peter stayed in the boat. Yeah, as Jesus taught, Peter had a front row seat. He was stuck right there. Afterwards, he turned to Peter to go out a little bit farther. And of course, you probably noticed the difference between Jesus said, cast out the nets. That's actually a system of 3 nets. It takes 2 boats and a whole system of nets to catch fish. And that would have been plenty to hold those fish. But Peter didn't do that. He went out and cast out 1 net. And of course, it was ripped because it was too big. It was too big of a school of fish for just 1 net. But it got Peter's attention. Now, I want you to notice in the call of Peter that Jesus meets the needs of his family. Those of us who are married know that if we're going to accept a calling like this, we better have our wife on board. Notice that before Jesus called Peter, he healed his wife's mother. We know by tradition that Peter's wife was martyred before he was. She was a believer. And I think you can go back to this story right here. I believe this is where it started, when Jesus healed her mother. The second thing Jesus did is he was calling them, but he gave them 2 boats full of fish to supply the needs of the family. It's true that Peter probably continued fishing after that, but still, the 2 boats full of fish. It says that they left all, but the fish still belonged to the family. Well, interesting story. Come back next week when we can continue on with more insights on the story of the week. We'll see you next week.